everyone! In this video, I'm gonna tell you everything that you need to know about the latest COVID-19 rules and restrictions when traveling to New Zealand. From vaccination requirements, what you need to do when you arrive at the airport, and the rules that you need to know and follow when staying here. So first, what are the COVID-19 vaccine requirements and who needs to supply proof of vaccination when entering New Zealand? So you need to provide proof of vaccination when entering New Zealand if you are not a New Zealand citizen, not an Australian citizen living in New Zealand, or if you are a foreign aircrew arriving in New Zealand. If you are a New Zealand citizen or a permanent resident, then you don't actually need to provide proof of vaccination when entering New Zealand. This also includes if you are an Australian citizen living in New Zealand, if you are age 16 and under, or if you can't be vaccinated for medical reasons, but you do need to provide an electronic or paper evidence from a health practitioner. Now, what are the approved vaccines for entry to New Zealand? The New Zealand COVID-19 website has the full list of approved vaccines for entry to New Zealand, including how many doses are required. To be eligible to enter New Zealand, you must have had a full course of an approved COVID-19 vaccine. Now, some of the approved vaccines includes the AstraZeneca. For this one, you need 2 doses. Johnson & Johnson, which only requires 1 dose. Moderna, which requires 2 doses. Novavax, which also requires 2 doses. The Pfizer vaccine, which is actually the vaccine that was administered to most New Zealanders, so that requires 2 doses. And you've also got the Sinovac, which also requires 2 doses. So for the full list, I will put the link down below of where you can get this information. Now, how do you provide proof of vaccination? So if you're someone who needs to provide proof of vaccination to enter New Zealand, then you need a digital vaccine certificate or another form of electronic or paper document from a government health authority or approval authority confirming that you've had a full COVID-19 vaccine course. Your evidence must confirm that you've received 1 or more COVID-19 vaccine, depending on what vaccine it is and what's the required dose. In your evidence, you need to provide your name, the name of the vaccine or vaccines you received, the name of the agency that administered them, the name of the place where you received them, and the date of each dose or the date when a primary vaccination course was completed. Now, what about vaccination exemptions? So New Zealand actually gives the opportunity to apply for an exemption if you're traveling to New Zealand from a country with no or limited access to COVID-19 vaccines. Now, you need to apply to the Ministry of Health for an exemption along with the reason of why you need one. The Director General of Health will decide if you can get granted an exemption or not. Again, I will put the link down below for information on what you need to do if you want to apply for an exemption. What are the testing requirements before and after you arrive in New Zealand? So the latest update as of the 21st of June 2022 states that you don't actually need to provide proof of a negative COVID-19 test when entering New Zealand. So that means that you don't need to test negative before you actually hop on the plane to travel to New Zealand. However, you must take 2 rapid antigen tests or RAT when you arrive in New Zealand. So you need to test yourself if you're a New Zealand resident or citizen coming home, or you're coming to New Zealand for work or holiday. So that actually applies to most people. Children under 6 months don't need to take a test, and if you're only transiting in New Zealand, then you also don't need to take a test. But how do you actually get the rapid antigen test? So you will be given a welcome pack with RAT tests included at biosecurity after you've gone through customs. Now, when do you need to take the test? You need to take the test on day 0, so that means on arrival, and you also need to take a test on day 5 or day 6 of your stay. So after taking your test, you do need to report the results. So when you arrive, you'll actually receive an email with a link to an online form where you could report your test results. And if you don't report your test results, you will actually get a follow-up email or text reminding you to report your test results. If you don't want to use the form, then you could also call the COVID-19 test result line to report your results. What happens if you test positive? If you test positive on the rapid antigen test, New Zealand requires you to take a PCR test to actually confirm your results. So you will receive an email with instructions of what you need to do and where the testing centers are. And you will also need to self-isolate for 7 days. If you test negative, then you still need to report your test results, but you don't need to self-isolate. Now, what are the isolation requirements when entering New Zealand? So New Zealand actually no longer requires people to self-isolate unless they test positive during the required testing period or you get COVID sometime after. If you do get COVID at any point during your stay in New Zealand, then you need to self-isolate for 7 days. During this time, you need to source your own food and accommodation and also pay for any healthcare costs. If you get a positive RAT test but then you test negative on the PCR test, then you also don't need to self-isolate. This is because PCR test is more accurate, hence removing the requirement to self-isolate. Now, if you do need to self-isolate, this means that you are not allowed to leave your home or your accommodation. There's more information on the New Zealand COVID-19 website for what you need to do if you have to self-isolate. And now let's talk about the New Zealand traffic light system. So New Zealand is actually operating in the COVID-19 framework called the traffic light system. So this means that there are different rules depending on what traffic light we're on. There's green, orange, and red, with red being the highest restriction. At the moment, New Zealand is on the orange light setting. Now, being in orange means that we can do pretty much most everyday activities, but you need to wear a face mask on most indoor settings, but you don't need to wear a face mask on any outdoor setting. So a summary of the New Zealand orange system is that at orange, you can continue to do everyday activities, but we need to protect our vulnerable community. You must wear a face mask in many indoor locations, but face mask is not required for outdoor locations. Now, there's no capacity limits or distancing requirements when we're at orange. What about the red setting? So being in red does not mean we're in lockdown, but that there are certain rules and restrictions that we need to follow to actually reduce transmission of COVID-19. Now, there was a point where only some regions or areas in New Zealand was at red and some were at orange. So that was dependent on the vaccination percentage at the time, because New Zealand was aiming for each DHB or each area to have 90% vaccination rate, and as far as I'm aware, all areas in New Zealand has hit that requirement, so now the entire country is at orange. So during red, you can still access basic services such as food and healthcare. Workplaces and businesses can also still stay open, including schools, and you can still visit cafes and bars and go to the gym, but this is when the capacity limits and distancing requirements apply. So during red, indoor gatherings are limited to 200 people, but there's actually no limit to outdoor gatherings. Now, businesses and workplaces can remain open, but I do encourage that for those who can to work from home. Now, for hospitality businesses such as cafes, bars, or restaurants, there's also a 200 limit on indoor gatherings. This also means that customers must be seated and separated from other groups when indoors. Now, again, there's no capacity limits outdoors. And of course, being in green means that there's no restrictions. Now, they still encourage wearing face masks and just also keeping a good hygiene habit. So in summary, you don't need proof of a negative COVID-19 test before you enter New Zealand. You need to take a rapid antigen test on arrival and on day 5 or 6 of your arrival, and you need to self-isolate for 7 days if you test positive at any point during your stay. New Zealand is also currently at the orange light setting, which means that you can basically do all activities just as normal. There's no limits to indoor or outdoor gatherings, but you just need to wear a face mask when you're in most indoor settings. So for the vaccination requirements, you need to have had the full course of COVID-19 vaccine, and that your vaccine must be on the approved list of COVID-19 vaccines to enter New Zealand. You also need to provide proof of your COVID-19 vaccine showing the details that you meet the vaccine requirements. So that was everything that you need to know about the COVID-19 rules and requirements when traveling to New Zealand. For more information, I'm gonna put the links down below where you can find all this information. Now, if you're someone who's planning to visit New Zealand and curious to know what you need to do to apply for a New Zealand tourist visa, then click on this video here or here where I cover this in more detail. And if this is your first time to my channel, then welcome. My name is Jules. I create videos about my experiences of living and working here in New Zealand, and that includes traveling, going on adventures, and just sharing useful information for those wanting to visit or travel to New Zealand. So if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down below. I would really appreciate it. And also let me know in the comments what other topics you might be interested in learning more about or watching. Now, that is all for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. See ya!